Welcome to the Ezra Digital 2020 Education Series. I would now like to turn over the program to Steve Bisbee for introduction.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm Steve Bisbee, the president and founder of eOriginal, a leading digital transaction management platform for financial services. eOriginal has developed a unique digital solutions that have replaced paper processes, expedited transactions, and created business process efficiencies for over 600 clients in a digital financial ecosystem. We are members of the Electronic Signature and Records Association, which was formed to educate and advocate for the use and acceptance of digital signatures, records, and transactions. I have been on the Ezra board since its inception. I'm here today with my colleague, Margot Tank, who is a partner at DLA Piper and the U.S. co-chair of the firm's financial services sector. She's been helping companies with digital transformation for over 30 years and has advised clients on over 1,000 processes and platforms that enable digital transactions and digital payments, including the financial services, commercial, and retail, commerce, and healthcare space. Margot is counsel to Ezra and an ex officio member of the board. Margot and I are the co-chairs of Ezra's Digital 2020 Education Series, one of these webinars today. Margot?
Thank you, Steve. Ezra members are dedicated to providing, promoting, and participating in Ezra values, which are expertise, leadership, collaboration, accessibility, and technology neutrality. As part of Ezra's educational mission, we've created this education series that will run through December. The education series provides insight and practical guidance on business technology and legal implementation issues across a wide spectrum of applications. There will be presentations from Ezra members and their partners on topics ranging from remote online notarization, such as today, digital mortgage and auto finance, to the use of voice signatures and other biometric methods to authenticate signers and execute documents. Although e-sign was enacted 20 years ago, there's still a learning curve as companies continue to transform their business practices. These issues are even more critical now during this time of social distancing, remote work, and contactless customer engagement. We hope that you will find these webinars useful.
So I would like to introduce our speakers today, Nicole Booth and Renee Hunter from Notarize. Notarize set out to redefine what trust looks like in the digital age. They believe that every transaction online deserves to be safe and secure for future generations. Providing legal online notarizations, the Notarize platform is available 24/7, allowing you to get documents notarized at your convenience, anytime and anywhere. Nicole serves as the Executive Vice President of Public Affairs at Notarize. Nicole leads the organization's public affairs efforts to build and maintain trust and support among external audiences, including government, industry, and community affairs. She joined Notarize in August of 2020. Prior to Notarize, Nicole was an executive at the Quicken Loans and Rock family of companies and a member of K&L Gates public policy and law practice in Washington, D.C. Nicole has spent time on Capitol Hill working on legislative issues in the personal office of former Ways and Means Committee Chairman Dave Camp and former New Hampshire Congressman Jeb Bradley. Renee Hunter is the General Counsel for Notarize, and she is blazing the trail to enable more widely adopted use of e-mortgages and fully digital closing experiences through her public policy work to modernize state notarial laws. She actively participates in committees of several national organizations, including the Mortgage Bankers Association, American Land Title Association, the Mortgage Industry Standards and Maintenance Organization, the Notary Public Administrative Section of the National Association of Secretaries of State. Renee has served on several state development work groups, adding in the drafting and adoption of consistent and sound online notarization laws and regulation, and has served as an observer for the Uniform Law Commission's drafting committee as it amended the revised Uniform Law on Notarial Acts to provide an expanded applicability of online notarizations. Please welcome Nicole and Renee.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you, Steve, for that lovely introduction. Really quick, we're going to run through our agenda for today, and then again, leave some time for questions. So apparently everything is first on the list today with this agenda, but that's okay. We have 4 areas that we're going to focus on. First, we're going to give you a lay of the land on remote online notarization. We'll give you a quick refresher and then kind of see where states are sitting. Second, we're going to do a fireside chat where we're going to debunk about 5 myths of remote online notarization. And then last, for Renee and I, Renee is going to give us some ingredients for a compliant platform and some tips there. And then last, if we have availability, with time, we're going to leave it open for audience Q&A. So let's jump right into it. So again, talking about a refresher, what are the different types of notarizations and what do all these acronyms stand for? There's been so much going on over the last year or two, and a lot of different notarizations and acronyms have come about. So, we look at it in 4 different ways, depending on whether it's e-signed or wet signed, in-person or remote. So first of all, there's your traditional notarization where you're in person, you have a wet signature, all of the documents are being notarized right in front of you, and then things can be sent out snail mail. The second is an in-person electronic notarization, or IPEN. Again, that is in person, where you have documents electronically signed on a device, can be sent via encrypted email. And a lot of times we see IPEN used specifically in the real estate area, in the real estate business vertical. Third, you have remote ink signed notarization, which we've heard a lot about this year. And that is just what it sounds like. You're remote through video. The notary and the signer are remote through video. They have a wet signature. The signer has the documents in front of them. They do a wet signature, and then things are sent via snail mail. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about today is remote online notarization. That's where it's remote through a secure video on a piece of electronic hardware. You have an electronic signature, electronic document, and then encrypted email or encrypted platform that's all shared on. So let's talk remote online notarization, a little bit more on what we're focusing on today. So what does this mean? And we really need to work on getting you an educational video on this, but you're going to have to deal with my steps for right now. So first of all, documents are uploaded onto a platform. Then the signer will send their ID for verification and credential analysis. For our platform, the signer then completes a series of knowledge-based authentication questions. They must get a certain amount right in a certain amount of time, or they're going to be kicked out from the system. It doesn't mean that they can't get their notarization completed. It just means they'll have to do it in another one of the options that they have. Once the credential analysis and KBAs are completed, then the signer will meet the notary on the platform. The notary is the last line of defense, again, to review that ID, the person, and then the surrounding area of where the notarization will be completed. And then the notary walks through the document with the signer, applies their electronic notary stamp or seal, and then upon completion, the documents are sent either an encrypted email or they're uploaded into a platform. It depends on what type of technology platform that you're using. The goal for the process is to be a digital signing table. So meaning not a lot is changing in front of the in-person, from the in-person experience. All the same players are there, all the same safety measures involved. It's just the notary, the signer, and then in some states, the attorney just happen to be in the safety of their home or on their computer on an electronic device. So why remote online notarization? So what I did is I took our talking points and our notes from today, and I created a word cloud of a lot of the things that you'll hear when we're talking about why remote online notarization. So that's what you're seeing in front of you. So the pandemic really highlighted the need for digital services, to continue day-to-day functions in the safety of homes, to accelerate in states to protect people from in-person meetings where appropriate, to scale and view how RON actually functions, because, before it was a convenience and now people saw it as a need. Very important, this will keep notaries safe as well. And then something that we're going to highlight towards the end of this webinar is the need to review current policies to bridge the digital divide. And what does that mean? That means making sure all communities have access to digital services like RON, whether that's giving them access to hardware or broadband. So we're trying to work on bridging that digital divide, and more to come on that later in the discussion. So access to RON is dependent on law passage in states. And I think we all know this, but it's always worth saying it again. Where do we stand currently? So the map that you're looking at focuses on permanent and temporary RON laws, not executive orders. The states with laws and regulations, if they're needed, are in the darker blue color. Those with lighter blue are permanent, but are awaiting possible regulations. Those with the lightest of powder blue are temporary laws, and then gray states do not have permanent or temporary RON laws. So what does this mean? Remote online notarization is live in 29 states. Hawaii was the latest to have their bill signed by the governor on September 15th. It was at the last minute, but he did sign it. So Hawaii is the newest member of remote online notarization. You can see that California and a large portion of the South and Northeast have yet to move bills. So heading into 2021, we still have a lot of educating to do and conversations to have in the states. We're going to be watching the Northeast, particularly Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and New York for movement. And in the South, keeping an eye on the Carolinas as well as Georgia, who had a bill last year, and we expect we'll see some movement again this year. And then finally, we're keeping a close eye and we're being engaged in California. They are one of the last on the west side of the coast to do some movement. And so we want to make sure that we're getting them engaged and involved and answering questions that they have. There are many factors in play, and this fall could really determine a lot of movement. Things that we're watching for: November elections, what does the legislature look like, who the governors, but then also where does the pandemic stand in the fall heading into 2021? So again, a lot of movement here on remote online notarization. We expect a lot in 2021, and always happy to answer any other questions that you have regarding state legislation and where we see things headed. So enough of hearing from me, for crying out loud. Let's talk to Renee. So, we have been traveling across the country, educating about RON and listening to states, notaries, and communities pre and post pandemic. So Renee is going to chat with me and debunk 5 myths we've heard about RON along the way. Renee, are you out there?
I am out there. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Wonderful. So we're just going to jump right into it, Renee. The first myth is RON increases the potential for fraud. So my first question to you, Renee, is what are fraud prevention mechanisms? What fraud prevention mechanisms are baked into RON?
That's an excellent question, and I think the best place for us to start. So the RON process itself was designed to provide enhanced fraud prevention, specifically, and as you know, Nicole, as whether we were over at the FOC working together or at separate companies and Notarize itself, we've traveled around the country working in those task groups, educating lawmakers and working with our industry partners. I can't tell you how many times I saw folks from different companies out on the road, or where we'd all meet in the airport. But one of the key things that we've done and we continue to do as we go and help work in these work groups, help states out, is ensure that there's specific key provisions and requirements in each state's law. These things include multi-factor authentication of an unknown signer and a remotely located witness or witnesses, or even a credible witness when the signer doesn't have credentials. The next thing is live audio video communication technology. That is not only live real time, but that it's secure. Next, the complete audio video recording of the notarial act needs to be maintained as part of that notary record, and there needs to be a backup. Following up on that is the robust audit logs that travel along with the documents, that there are system logs, and additionally, tamper-evident journals and records that contain records that actually just document, that document those notarizations. And for the most part, states are all consistent and have enacted these principles. That's why it continues to be critical for Notarize and all of our industry partners to continue to actively participate in legislative and regulatory processes. We want to be sure that we have these processes in place and there are minimum standards. Notarize wants to be around for a long time, so we know we're going to put these processes in place. But setting just a minimum standard across the board that's technology neutral is very important, so it allows us to continue to grow as well.
So Renee, the most active industry pushing for RON has been the real estate industry. Can you talk about why they've been so adamant for RON use and why they feel it protects a huge life moment like the American dream of purchasing a home?
Yeah, that goes back to those fraud prevention mechanisms that are built in. The things that you don't get with RIN or what people are now calling PRON, which is a form of remote notarization where paper is used, but some authentication may be used. The important part about a true RON platform and a RON service provider, as well as these remote online notarization laws, is that these fraud enhancements are all built in and it's part of one complete system. So for one of life's most important transactions, those fraud prevention mechanisms, including that audio video recording, which is capturing everyone on screen. I can't tell you, even outside of the real estate context, we've heard from end users, business partners, where they've had a drop. We haven't quite hit the number on the percentage, but a drop in fraud that folks have attempted in the past or have been perpetrated. And they feel confident it's because of these fraud prevention mechanisms. Again, the multi-factor authentication, the video, the fact that the notary has a copy and that you know that you can go to a vendor and you know who the vendor is. So those are the reasons why they're now promoting and have gotten behind and have been most interested in remote online notarization. They also want to make sure it's being done right, and they agree on those minimum standards.
I really appreciate that. Again, we've seen the real estate industry, pushing hard in the state. So thank you for that update. Switching gears slightly, could you talk about, authenticity? So could you provide some thoughts on concerns around the authenticity of a document?
Yeah, this is a popular concern that most folks initially have. But then after you start to show them the platform, the documents that are produced out of platforms, including the fact that there are robust system logs, every action is being documented along with that actual document. Some folks call it a certificate of completion, but there's a document audit log that captures along with that document all of the critical occurrences or all of the critical actions. Again, not anything that's unknown to the folks here that are on the ESRA group, but just new things for people to think about. Again, that audit trail attaches itself within the record, and now you still have the remote notary's journal and that audio video recording. And I think the key piece is under the laws that govern the notarial practices in every single U.S. jurisdiction, no notary, and including a technology service provider for that notary, none of them have the lawful ability to alter notarized documents or e-notarized documents in official notarial records, including e-journals and audio video recordings. Some states have even gone as far as to require the audio video recording and the holder, which is typically going to be the vendor on behalf of that notary, to provide documented evidence of the backup strategies and have critical provisions in place should that vendor go out of business, how they're going to get copies of those records. So again, all of this is also subject to criminal penalties and suspension of the Notarial Commission as well. So practically speaking, again, we keep going back to, it's not only providing that enhanced fraud prevention, but now you have a plethora of information that you typically wouldn't have around a notarial act if it were done in paper.
So I know that we've spent a lot of time on fraud prevention. I do have just one more question on this myth. And, on the road, we've heard the biggest fraud deterrent of RON is the ability to have that recording of the audio and video, to have that audio visual session. And so what makes that session important? And then second, how do we address concerns about the ability to manipulate that audio, video, and that recording?
Excellent question. So it goes back to that live audio video feed is itself a fraud deterrent. Obviously, not every fraudster is going to be smart enough not to get on camera. If somehow they get through credential analysis, knowledge-based authentication, and now they're on video, at least you have documented evidence of it. I will tell you personally on the platform, or not personally, but we've seen on the platform where someone's not actually they're not getting through because they know some of these information and can pass knowledge-based authentication to credential analysis and pretend to be someone else, but rather maybe they just do a fraudulent transfer, something that happens all the time in the paper world, because the notary doesn't, it's not the notary's job to question if the person, like really dig in, is this person permitted to do this? The notary is there to serve as a notary in an official capacity. So these videos actually provide law enforcement a mechanism should a fraudster come through. And when I say fraudster, again, not passing knowledge-based authentication to credential analysis, pretending to be someone else. So there's a tremendous amount of value in that video. So to that first piece, following up on that, the reason why there's a live video communication feed here is that it provides that additional layer of fraud prevention, because it's ensuring that the notary can talk, see, hear, and go back and forth. They can ask the person to turn their camera around the room so we can make sure that the video itself is not being manipulated. This is very valuable. It's a tool in the notary's belt. So again, we're providing the notaries more tools, and now it's all documented on camera. So they also have then the ability to terminate at any point in time should they not feel comfortable. So that notary is still a critical piece of this entire process.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for debunking some of those myths on fraud. We are moving on. So Ron, the second myth we hear is Ron lacks protections around personal information and privacy. So Renee, I have a couple questions here. First and second, we'll just put them together. How do technology vendors protect information from both the notary and the consumer perspective? And what are vendors doing with that personal information that they receive as part of the Notarial Act?
So that's a great question, and I can't answer for every vendor, but generally, and I can tell you what Notarize's principle is on this. No state requires anything but a notarial journal, or what I'll call generally the notarial record, because the audio video recording may not be part of the journal necessarily, but no state is requiring anything beyond what is required for a notarial journal and an audio video recording. That includes first name, last name, date of birth, primary address, date the credential expires that was provided, the state that issued that credential. They do not require, no state requires a copy of that credential to be part of a notarial journal. And most states, well, quite a few states prohibit the notary from actually having a credential number in their journal. There's a few states that require like an IP address or locale of the notary and the signer at the time, but those are generally all the things that are required in addition to a description of the document, not a copy of the document itself. So the question is, what is that vendor continuing to hold on to? Do they need to hold on to it? The notary shouldn't have access to anything but what is needed post signing that is necessary for their journal. That is their journal. So definitely want to make sure that you're checking with system vendors, that if you're using them for your own notaries, or if you're going to use a remote online notary platform, that you're looking at their privacy practices. Again, RON providers should be following the state laws and policies that notary is actually commissioned, so very critical. I think the next question you would ask me was, what are technology vendors doing with the information they receive? I think that's kind of
correct.
Like part and the same. You should be asking your RON provider what they are doing. They shouldn't be doing anything additional. They shouldn't be selling that information. Again, Notarize doesn't, but there's no requirement in state law that you keep more than what is actually necessary for that notarial journal and that audio video recording.
Thank you. And don't worry, not all of them are as long as fraud, so we will be moving on to myth 3. So the third myth that we hear is RON is expensive and a challenge to implement. So Renee, what have you heard from states, notaries, and business on RON implementation and processes?
Another great question. So it of course is going to vary based on the state, the business of the notary, but generally, and I don't want to speak for any of our state partners or business partners or even notaries, but generally from our perspective, what I've seen is it depends on that level of approval that a state is seeking of both the notaries and the vendors. So all of the states are requiring notaries to be commissioned or rather registered as remote online notaries. It depends on how deep that process goes at the state level and what the current infrastructure is that they have in place. Additionally, they're requiring registration, or some states are requiring what they call approval of RON vendors. The registration at the very least will tell you what vendors are in your state, how they're where you can reach them, and then you have a list of vendors. There's probably like 5 or 6 questions that we typically see. And then there's a few states or a handful of states that actually require approval. That's a little more detailed. It can usually consist of a demo and a series of information security and process related questions and some attestations. So from the state's perspective, I know there's always concern about how much it costs. I can't speak for how much time it's going to cost. It really depends on the level of detail that is required by that state. I do think one thing to note is a lot of states wanted a lot of control and asked a lot of things of vendors initially in those few couple states that were rolling out. I think they realized that when a provider, like, because we comply with the law to a T, some of those things are not as necessary, like having the vendor continue to check a bond and that the bond is active, or that the notary took the training that is state-based and getting documented evidence of that training. So I think there's a learning process. Everyone wants to make sure the vendors are doing what they need to be doing. And as we keep going through states, we're using it as a way to teach some best practices, or at least give people names of folks to reach out to. From a business perspective, again, this really depends on your vendor. I know a lot in the real estate industry, I've been hearing, oh, this is really hard to implement. Again, I think it goes back to the vendor you're working with, and also the process that you're taking digital and the level that are you going from completely paper? Have you already started to digitize some of your processes? Notarize has, if you're a business, it's as easy as uploading your documents, creating templates, and integrating that into your workflow. API, like, does your vendor have an API? We have a number of APIs for different services, so it depends. It's not as difficult as one may think. You just want to make sure that your vendor is going to work with you to help prove out those processes. For the notary, quite honestly, it's not that difficult. We have come up with our own guides. I know that the National Notary Association has guides on how to become a remote online notary. Typically, it's going to be a registration, provide a nominal fee, $10 to $50, I believe is what we're currently at or seeing. The notary needs to send in an exemplar of their signature, or their electronic signature, their electronic seal that's compliant, notarizing, providing the seal for free to the notaries. Whether or not they're on our platform, they can walk away with it. Additionally, the errors and omissions insurance, that's not based on the state level, so it'll depend on who you're working with and if they have increased requirements as a business to use a remote online notary. So we haven't found it to be too difficult. It's just a matter of how tech savvy are you. And we've done our best to make it as easy as possible for notaries to essentially self-onboard with a compliance check behind the scenes.
Got it. So that's great. That's great to hear. We're going to move on to the fourth myth. So RON, the fourth myth that we hear is RON allows for cross-state lines and allows for concerns about across state lines and could lack proper oversight. So Renee, what does oversight in the current notarial world look like now versus one with a remote online notarization?
Well, so as with paper notarizations, the level of oversight is determined by the commissioning state. So this is why it's been very important for Notarize and a lot of the other folks in the industry that have been following or actively participating in the legislation. That's why it's been particularly important to have those minimum standards. That's why Notarize, definitely has backed the Secure Notarization Act, because there are now minimum standards We do think it's important that every state have minimum standards because we don't want to race to the bottom. That being said, every state can still then go ahead and govern their notaries as they see fit. The goal is not to take away any authority or power from a state at all. We just want to make sure that across borders, all notaries are basically required to use the same mechanisms to help prevent fraud. That way there won't be questions around those documents.
All right, so we do have one more myth left, everyone. Myth number 5, Ron will make litigation expensive and more complex. So in the event that the document becomes part of a legal dispute, what recourse do businesses and consumers relying on these documents have against the out-of-state notaries?
All right, so this is the same as in the paper world. So I go back to, and I think Mike Aronson is listening in, but a notary is a notary is a notary. All we're changing is how the notary is actually able to complete the notarization here. So I want to make sure, and I know we're going to touch on it again, but that's why I keep going back to, it's very similar to how it happens in the paper world. In the event of a lawsuit, discovery of out-of-state records, including depositions of the notary, and would follow the same well-established processes we have today for those official e-journals and the audio-video recordings, as well as any of those, as we would with the paper journals. So again, businesses and consumers relying on remote online notarizations from notaries in other states, they'll have the same legal ability also to sue an out-of-state notary or an out-of-state technology service provider as well. So there are still mechanisms in place. Those things don't go away because you're using a notary from a different state or a notary from a different state notarized that document that is later than finds its way in court in 2 different states. So.
All right. So we have about 10-15 minutes of the formal discussion left before we move into Q&A. But, you know, up until now, we've spent the day talking about giving you a refresher on Ron, talking about the state of play, and then Renee just gave you some answers to questions that we've heard across the country as we've been on the road. And so now, what does this mean? How does this help you? What are we looking for in a compliant platform and a compliant program? And so Renee is going to spend the next few minutes to talk about 3 or 4 items that she sees in a compliant platform. So Renee, I'm going to just move forward on the slides and I will try to keep up with you.
All right, and I'm hearing you on my time, so I will go as quickly as possible.
That's all good.
So go ahead. All right, so this first slide here, we're talking about generally, again, the security measures that are in place. We are all relying upon notarial acts and use notary public still to this day, because they're not only serving as that official and partial witness, they're shielding against duress and coercion. Again, it still conveys that solemnity of the transaction, but it goes back to, there is a reason we're relying on these to the core usually, and it's because the notarization itself serves an evidentiary role. So it's very important, and I can't stress this enough, that platforms are ensuring that they're complying with individual state laws, and that the notaries, because the individual notaries, I'll be honest, they're not going to know better. They're not going to know to ask a bajillion different questions. You're going to have really great notaries out there who are super tech savvy, but you need a platform that a notary can hop in, use, understand, that provides training. So the first thing I'll touch on truly is the identity verification must be built into the system. The notary still must feel comfortable that they have satisfactory evidence of identity of that signer. In the Ron context, again, that means that absent the notary's personal knowledge of the signer must go through that identity proofing process. Right now, at the present time, all states, except for one, are requiring knowledge-based authentication and credential analysis. You want to be sure that absent that personal knowledge flow, that the signer must complete and successfully, and I can't stress enough, complete and successfully pass both the knowledge-based authentication and the credential analysis, and that the notary is provided a copy of that credential, because again, that notary is still there to verify you are to look at that credential, and I'm trying not to use my hands here, look at that credential, look at the screen, and do the comparison. And is that final check mark. So I think those are the two things I really wanted to hit on this slide. Make sure that your signer is being identity proofed appropriately for if you're a business looking for a platform, if you're a notary looking for a platform. Your laws require, or the notarial laws do require multi-factor authentication. And in this case, currently knowledge-based authentication and credential analysis. Next slide.
Let's move on to an in-house legal team, Renee. Let's talk about that a little bit.
So I think this slide, generally what I want to stress is maybe they don't even have an in-house legal team, but do they have a compliance team? Do they understand the laws? I always go back to Notarize is a legal service product. E-signature is a legal service product. Remote online notarizations are relied upon for some of life's most important and transactions, business transactions. So at Notarize, I have, and I know my predecessor, strive to ensure that states are enacting those consistent laws, but they're not all consistent, and that's just the truth. Every state has a little bit of a variation, and because we have been involved so deeply in that process, we're able to ensure that the system is being implemented to take into account the little idiosyncrasies from state to state. There are a few consistent states, but I can't stress enough how important it is that the vendors and that the remote online notarization solutions out there are consulting with attorneys. If they don't have in-house counsel, is there still someone there who is not only technically able to speak to how the platform can comply with the state laws, but then additionally speak to individual state compliance requirements.
Thank you. And what about checks and balances, which is my favorite headline today?
This one makes me chuckle. So for checks and balances, I keep going back to what is that system providing you as a business when that document is being output? What is it providing the notary? Can the notary, is the journal tamper sealed and tamper evident? Is the audio video recording logically associated to that journal and downloadable as part of that journal export? Can notaries export on their own? Again, are all of the pieces in place that need to be in place for a robust system audit log and those document audit trails? So I just wanted to, again, hit home on this point. Just make sure that you're checking with your vendor and ensuring that you're looking at those audit trails and reviewing them.
All right. So the last tip, talking about human assistance, what do we want to hit on here?
So this goes back to the fact that the remote online notarization tools are given to the notary to help enhance their job. It's just yet another way for a notary to perform a notarization. That notary needs to be involved. If you're going through the remote online notarization process, the notary should be given information and legally is required to know that the signers passed knowledge-based authentication. They shouldn't be getting copies of those questions or the answers, but they should know that the signer passed knowledge-based authentication. They should know what the output is of that credential analysis, and then they should ultimately have the opportunity to decide, even if everything else is passed, does this person still look like the person on that credential that was presented in workflow, and even validate if they want to on camera, they may have to redact it depending on the state, that the credential is the same credential that's in the hands of the signer. So again, the notary is still a critical piece of this entire process.
That's great. Thank you for those tips. Do you have any last minute tips, or are we ready to move on?
I think we can move on because we're going to run out of time if we don't.
Okay. As you can tell, we can talk about this all day. I ask questions like this to Renee all day, every day. Is poor Renee. So we did want to leave you with a bit of a call, a very important call to action. You know, as an industry, as a technology industry, we can do better. And what does that mean? So the pandemic highlighted the need for digital services and devices, but it also showed the holes in infrastructures where communities need a bridge to break down that digital divide and the need for digital inclusion. And so at Notarize, we've been, we believe that all communities should have access to digital services like Ron, And so we're urging the industry to take a look at digital inclusion. And what I did here is I put a slide of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance provided a definition of what digital inclusion is, and I put it here, and I put the 5 elements here because I think that's important. It's a really broad topic, but something that we can all get engaged in. So you can learn more at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance website. But with that, there's something you can do. It's coming up. We have an easy way for you all to get involved. And the Digital Inclusion Week is coming up October 5th through the 9th, so about 10 days away. I included the hashtags for the week below. You'll see some social media coming out of Notarize. Feel free to reshare that if that's as simple for you. But, we encourage you to get involved with NDIA and Digital Inclusion Week and, take that next step to educating ourselves as an industry on what digital inclusion is and what it means, and how do we help communities, all communities, have access to these great digital services, whether we're in pandemic or not, services like remote online notarization. So the NDIA has a lot of great information about how to be active. Happy to share that information again later and talk about this in another time. So we want to thank you. Thank you for attending. You can find more information at notarize.com/Ezra. And I think that's all we have, Steve and Margot. I think we can open it up for Q&A. I don't know if anybody's taking care of that.
Sure. Thank you, Nicole and Renee, for sharing such valuable information and content. Really great. And I did not know about Digital Inclusion Week, so that's great to know and excellent information. If you have questions, please submit them by the questions panel. And if we can't get to all the questions today, we'll certainly have Renee and Nicole to follow up. While we're waiting for any questions, let's talk a little bit about Ezra public policy initiatives. I know we have a slide on that, perhaps next.
Oh, my bad. It's coming.
Oh, it's you. Okay, you're controlling it. Okay.
Sorry about that. I was almost perfect. Almost.
You're always perfect. You're always perfect. So Ezra has been working on a number of public policy initiatives. Just to mention a few, electronic will legislation, essentially supporting uniform statutes. Acceptance of e-signed IRS forms. That has been a mission of Ezra since the beginning, and we've had a lot of success there and are continuing along with that, whether it's the 4506T for real estate or W-9s and so on. Blockchain, supporting uniform technology neutral legislation. There's been activity over the last 18 months in a number of states. We have a position, and all of our positions are public policy positions are on the website. We clearly continue to work on e-notarization generally, traditional e-notarization, which we're calling it now when you use electronic signatures in person, but also RON and the continued adoption in the States. And Nicole and Renee, your map was great. And I think there's going to continue to be activity, a lot of activity as we go into the next year. Federal Reserve banks and federal home loan banks, acceptance of e-notes as collateral. That effort continues, and we've had good success there. Federal home loan banks have all come out and are ready for acceptance, and the Federal Reserve banks, most of them, but not all, but we're continuing to educate there. Vehicle titling and odometer issues. We have a lot of activity. We have a lot of members that are in auto finance, and we've had good success with educating both at the state and federal level to continue to have a complete paperless transaction. So Mallory, I'm going to turn it to you to see if we have any questions at this time. So Nicole, what do you see in terms of timing for the remainder of the states? You know, take your best guess.
So I thought this might come up. So, you know, we have a little less than half of the states left. We also have, there was a play out, a federal bill in the pandemic that hasn't moved very much this fall. And so, but it was a nice, having that bill was a nice piece to encourage the states for movement. And so, I guess if I'm putting my, you know, magic hat on, I'm going to say we're about, you know, 60 to 75% of the way through. We could see, I've heard numbers between 5 to as high as 15 states. I think 15 is a high number. So I think we're a year or two away from maybe 3 through the 50 states. It depends on the level of education and making sure that we're getting in there, and you know, making sure that the state feels comfortable with what the law looks like. It also matters what the Secretary of State feels like, how they want regulations to work, right? We want to make sure that they're a contributor to the process. You know, I think it's really important when industry, you know, for me specifically, I like to go to the Secretary of State first to talk about, you know, remote online notarization bill, and then, you know, talk to other partners with that as well. I think that's something that we forget, right? You know, there are mortgage regulators, there are auto regulators. How do they feel about remote online notarization? So while the Secretary of State might be the regulator for remote online notarization and notary specifically, there are these other industries that we're involved in that we need to make sure that we're educating. So again, that was a very long-winded way, Margot, to say I think we're, you know, 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 from a 50-state adoption. That was hopeful. Okay. It's a little hopeful.
Yeah. So in terms of, and this is, you know, for both of you, in terms of uniformity of regulations, you know, that's going to be a tough one. Are there, you know, efforts underway? And obviously, you know, Ezra will be involved in trying to, you know, ensure uniformity and technology neutrality and so on. But your thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, I'll kick it off, Renee, and then I'll pass it over to you for the legal. Again, not a lawyer, but I like to play one on TV, as they say. So from a uniform law perspective, you know, we have a couple pieces of industry legislative text that are out there. We have the Uniform Law Commission text that brought together industry, lawyers that were appointed from states across the country, as well as consumer groups, and then other parts of state as well, that sat down for many days to amend, you know, RLONA and the Uniform Law Commission's law to include remote online notarization. So that's one act. We have a second act, which is the Mortgage Bankers Association and the American Land Title Association partnered again with the real estate industry to put together a model as well to create some uniformity across the states, at least give them a starting line. From a federal perspective, you know, I go back and forth because notarial law is directed by secretaries of state. You know, I would be you know, I'm selfish. Of course, I would like a federal law to cover all 50 states. You know, I won't lie if there are any folks from the state out there. However, I also appreciate that each state, first of all, handles notarial acts, but then also wants to make sure that this works for their citizens. So I respect that. So I'm going to stop at that point saying that there are a couple of model bills out there to create some uniformity, but long-term uniformity, I think that depends on how the state feels. And Renee, I don't know if you have anything else to add there.
Yeah, I think the only thing to add is then when you get to the regulations or the rules, depending on the state, what they call them, we've got the MISMO standards. Most states have been using that. It was actually funny. My VP of finance was newer. You know, not everyone at the company knows remote online notarization in and out. So he's newer to it. And I was like mentioning, oh yeah, the state, you know, is basically using the MISMO standards. He's like, oh, you know, that's only for real estate. I was like, no, you don't realize. The real estate industry has really controlled this. So we at least have those MISMO standards that are an attempt to help states keep things consistent while also keeping them technology neutral. Again, states still have the right, and to Nicole's point, I do respect that right. It's why we're still, we make sure we're building our platform specific to each state. We still do have the right, those states have the right to make their own tweaks and go their own routes, and there's been quite a few states that add on their own additional flavor. But we've got that. In addition, the MISMO standards were only intended to be, they're not regulations themselves, they're just to help inform the regulatory process. So, obviously Notarize has their own set of what we think the model regulations should look like, and we've collaborated with industry partners. So there's no official document, but there's what we've all agreed on, that there's 4 or 5 super active industry partners as to what we'd like to see in regulations as well.
And I think to sum it up, Marco, there's a lot. I think what Renee and I are trying to say is there's a lot of homework that's already been done in this space. There's a lot of documents to pull from, Q&As, a lot of discussions that have happened. And so if people are looking for, places to find to create some kind of uniformity, the homework's been done, and we're happy to continue educating on that.
Yeah, and perhaps that could be another Ezra Public Policy initiative to consolidate the effort and harmonize it, and push it out there. So a couple more questions. The approval process, Renee, you touched on that briefly. I don't know if you want to elaborate in terms of length of time, difficulty, engagement of the regulators, some thoughts on that.
So it ranges from just submit an application with 4 or 5 questions to submit an application with 20 questions, do a platform demo, then also go through some lightweight security audit. Additionally, Wisconsin now, and they haven't approved anyone officially now that their new regulations have come out, but we've seen that Wisconsin is going to do what they call a board review. So I'll be very interested to see what that is like. I have to believe it's just another demo process where we have to walk through all the functionalities, provide documentation. So it does really vary, and that's more of what I would call the approval process, though, and completely the state's right to do so, not always calling it an approval because they don't want to endorse or have liability around approving one platform or the other. But states generally want to know and want to feel comfortable that they know the platforms that are operating in their state and that their notaries are using, and they, we have no issue with that. We have no issue with any of the platform reviews. I mean, on the e-notarization side, with not the RON specifically, North Carolina has got a very detailed process. Admire them. It is, a full, I think we've got like 25, 30 questions there, and checklists. Ozzy and Secretary Marshall are great. So they've now allowed RIN and RON, and it's based on that same set of applications. So it does vary. I wish I could say it was one size fits all. It is not.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Toughest state, in your opinion? Toughest state?
As long as there are no states listening. Well, Indiana was not tough, but they have a few unique requirements in their law. North Carolina, again, I don't even want to say tough because it's not hard to get through. It's just the most things you have to do to get that approval. So I would say Indiana and North Carolina have been pretty neck and neck for the amount of research and due diligence they want to do on their platforms, and not hard, just a little more work than the others.
It's great. All right. Anything else that in the last minute that either Renee or Nicole want to share?
No, I don't have anything, but do feel free to reach out to us. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Renee. Do feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. As Renee said earlier, the remote online notarization community is a small town that travels across the country. So if you need a demo, if you need materials, the model acts or any documents that we've talked about during this webinar, we are more than happy to meet with you to walk through that, to make sure that you feel comfortable in what you're doing, whether you're a business notary, a state government, or a part of the community. And Renee, I'm going to stop talking so that I don't interrupt you.
No, I would actually say, we appreciate the time, and obviously, if anyone does have questions that they want to follow up with, or just want to know what's going on and what's happening where, we're always, we share information pretty freely, as long as it's not a trade secret or anything proprietary about the company. So don't ask those things, but we're open books, and we both love to talk. So.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. Really appreciate it today. We have a lot of great content coming up in the Digital 2020 Education Series that will run through December. You can find out more about Ezra and the series on Ezra's website at www.esignrecords.org. And of course, we would hope you'd consider joining Ezra on the website. There's a membership section. On behalf of Ezra and our speakers, thank you very, very much for joining us today.